Hi, welcome back to the channel. Well, today we're going to see which Koenigsegg you should buy, if you should buy one at all in the game. There's three to look at. There's the Entity XF based on the XXR, and that's quite cheap being an OG car. Next in line, the red one, is the Entity XXR based on the Agera and 2.3 million. That's pretty pricey. And the last one, and fairly newly released and on sale at the time I record at least, is the Entity MT based on the Koenigsegg Jesko. We'll talk more about each individual model as we go, but those are our contenders, so let's get started with some street driving. So starting with the cheapest, the XF, based on the CC series of Koenigsegg's, I've made mine to resemble the CC XR edition, fully clothed in carbon fibre, and only four were made. Hopefully you're looking at the picture and the car and comparing, and there's quite a few minor differences. This one is not going to be a winner for how close to the real car it was, especially at the back. That said, they have stuck with the general shape and it is very recognisable as the car. So now we're going to take it for a drive. And I will add that all these cars I had not driven for some time. The drives are not scripted or repeated, they are a first off drive, so I can get a real proper impression on how these cars actually go. I'm not massively bothered about interiors in the games, but there's a lot of parts of this interior that do match with the interior of the real car, so that's a good start. Also good is the way this car drives. It really does absorb the bumps very nicely. It's a very smooth driving car and tends to only become upset by the sort of bumps and lumps that upset a lot of cars. It's got good acceleration and decent brakes, and overall is a very smooth driving experience, especially with the cornering, which is nicely balanced, just a little bit of oversteer at the end. And overall, once I drove this round, I thought, oh, I wish I'd driven this a bit more. This is a nice car. So far so good, so let's take a look at the next one. This is the Entity XXR, based on the Agera, and I've made mine to be one of the only two Agera XS's. There's one in dark red and there's one in orange. And as you compare the front, you'll find it really looks very close to that car. And as we move around to the back, also very close. The only really obvious difference that really jumps out, like most of the entities in the game, are the side scoops are quite differently done. But overall, this looks really close to an XS. I'm really rather pleased with that. But how does it drive? Oh, you've spent your $2.3 million and your upgrades and you go out for your first drive. All those pops and bangs, and especially the high revving, short shifting, is probably a little bit of a shock to you. If you do like interiors, this may be a slight shock as well, because it doesn't really resemble the real car at all. Now the more I drove, the more I wondered, why is it always stuck on the rev limiter? Why is it making all this noise? And I did some reading up, and the car has what are called advanced handling flags. Well, they're not advanced, there's four of them. Oh, look at that. One of them makes it very bouncy, and of course the bounces will lead to crashes or skids, inevitably making you slower. Two of the other ones relate to the engine. One makes it sound like it's short shifting all the time, and the other one makes it sound like it's stuck on the rev limiter all the time. It's very poor, it's very disappointing. Original cars did not do that, and it all takes away from the driving experience. Now this is really exciting. Look at the car, look at the photo. They've made it very close. The side scoop is different. They've made that like an old Koenigsegg rather than the Jesko, but the front was a dead ringer, and the back is really very close as well. I've built mine to look like the Jesko Attack, which is the wings and splitters track version of the car. There's also a Jesko Absolute, which I believe you can build as well, and that has a little bit less in the way of wings. It's designed more about high speed. Anyway, this thing looks fantastic. It's off to such a good start. I am so excited to get in and have a drive of this, so let's go. Oh dear, with a horrible sense of deja vu, I realise it's doing the exact same things as the previous car with the over-revving, short shifting, etc. Let's have a look at the inside. Well, that's the interior from the XXR again, so a copy-paste. Well, we'll forget the interior and we'll get back to the driving. And you've probably heard already, again we have an engine that seems to be stuck on the rev limiter, always screaming away, always making more gear changes than the car could possibly have. We've just seen quite a bit of oversteer then when the car went over a bump, and a bit of a nosedive there on another bump. And so far as I drive the car, it feels quite similar to the XXR. That said, I am very seduced by how this car looks. With that rear wing as well, seen from the back, it looks fantastic. Moving on then to some objective testing, and I've started with a 3-way drag race just to see what the acceleration is like on these cars. The end results surprised me. They weren't quite what I'd read in some places, but the Jesco, the MT, was the clear winner, and then the other two cars were just a little way behind. So onto the test track with the 3 cars, starting again with the XF. Now I find this a very easy car to drive around the track, and I didn't have a huge amount of crashes. Most of my laps were fairly representative. If you catch a curb just wrong mid-corner and effectively unload the car, then it will throw the back out, but at the end of the day that is realistic with a mid-engine car. Otherwise the car is neutral, it deals well with the rest of the bumps, the brakes are excellent, and it's pretty quick in a straight line as we've seen. So overall, pretty easy to do a lap. It wasn't quite the fastest, it was a little bit behind the fastest car, which we'll see in a minute. But the point I think I'll make is this was consistently easy to achieve, and perhaps I could have gone a little bit faster if I'd just done a few more laps. Moving on to the XXR then. We've seen it has an issue with bumps, and of course it does on the track, and this can also affect what happens in the braking zones, and sometimes you have to brake early because you know there's a bump and that bump is going to throw the car off. It does actually have good acceleration brakes though. You can get snap oversteer, I suspect that's smaller bumps on the track, but it does make it a lot harder work, and I struggled for a consistent lap, to be honest. Somewhere between 4 and 5 of my laps were ruined by either crashing the car or at least having a spin. So it only really came together on 1 or 2. So a lot of work. Now all these cars are some way down in the pack, around 40th place or so in Bruffett's testing, so I mean you're not going to buy them to win races anyway, but if you were racing and you only had these cars, you would take the XF over this any day for consistency. I've just read my notes that I made after doing this track session in the MT, and I've written the very same things that I wrote down for the XXR, and it seems to me that the car is very, very similar under its gorgeous skin to the previous car. Now the interesting thing is that I actually got my fastest lap time in this car, and that's not always the case. I know in Bruffett's testing he got a faster lap time in the old car, in the XF, and I would trust his testing over mine. But I will say again, this is hard work, it's inconsistent. The stupid revving is not really affecting its performance, but it does mean you want to turn the sound down while you're playing. These are not exactly my favourite cars in the game. I don't hate them, but it's the reason that I've only done a stage 4 engine tune. I haven't spent the money on the full performance. It unfortunately means you cannot take these times versus other times in showcases I've done, for which I do apologise. The 3-way test track video was actually confusing and horrible to look at, so I will just summarise and say the XF beat the other two quite easily by dint of just being smoother and nicer to drive. Here we have all 3 builds in 15 seconds, so you will need a screenshot. They're all using custom crew colours. Now anybody can do those, I've got a video on it, you can make your own one-man crew to do them. However, if you don't want to, I've given some likely alternative colours that you can use straight out of the GTA palette. I want to know which car I should drive for the outro on this video, so I've got to score them, giving them each 1, 2 or 3 points, and we'll start off with looks. Now for me the MT is the clear winner. It's so close to the real car, and a pretty stunning looking car at that. The XXR is second. It does look very close to the Agera, but not as close as the MT does to the Jesko. Now the XF I have to put in last place. Whilst it's recognisable, there are such a number of detail changes all over the car that they've made. Moving on to customisation, well, as you might expect, the older car has the least. The XXR has a lot more customisation and gets 2 points, but the MT has even more. Liveries as well, there's an awful lot you can do with the MT. For street and track driving I've given the same scores, top points for the XF and only 1 equals for the other 2. I can't go on those small time differences, especially when in Bruff's testing those time differences were different. I'm afraid the 2 newer cars are just unpleasant and not as predictable. Moving lastly into value for money, the XF has to be the clear winner, a lovely driving car, and it's cheap. I'm giving 2 points to the MT because it's such a nice visual car to have in the garage, so as a static collector's piece I think it's worth a little bit more than the XXR. And that brings us on to our final order. So I think you could probably see this one coming, but to me the XF is the winner. It is the nicest of all the Koenigseggs. It is not top of its tree, it is not a must-have. The MT second and the XXR third are purely collector's cars. Do not buy them to drive. Well, there you have it. This was a much longer video than normal, and it took a huge amount of time to put together and to edit. So if you feel you got any entertainment or value at all out of it, or even if you just got this far, I really would appreciate a like and a comment. It really does help. And as always, thank you so much for watching.